Inner Steel, YouTube script. Be happy with yourself. There is a man standing at the edge of his own life. Not a cliff, not a crisis, just a quiet Tuesday morning, looking in the mirror, and feeling absolutely nothing for the person staring back. That man is not broken. That man is not weak. That man has simply forgotten one of the most ancient, most brutal, most liberating truths the Stoics ever handed down, that the opinion of yourself is the only one that was ever yours to begin with. Everything else, the applause, the approval, the validation, was borrowed. And borrowed things always get called back. You have been chasing something that doesn't exist. A version of yourself that satisfies everyone. A version that is always enough, always accepted, always praised. And every morning you wake up running that race, you lose a little more of who you actually are. This video is about stopping that race. Not quitting. Not giving up. Stopping. Because you finally understand that the finish line was never real. If you've been watching Inner Steel for any length of time, you already know we don't deal in comfort here. We deal in truth. And the truth about happiness, real, unshakable, bone-deep happiness with yourself, is something most men in the second half of life never find. Not because they didn't search, but because they searched in the wrong direction. Stay with me. Because what we're going to walk through together isn't a list of feel-good affirmations. It's 10 shifts, 10 profound, story-driven realities that will change the way you see yourself starting today. The first thing you have to understand is this: most men have never actually met themselves. In 1956, a man named Harry Harlow conducted a now famous experiment with infant monkeys. He gave them 2 artificial mothers, one made of wire that dispensed food, one made of soft cloth that offered nothing but warmth and closeness. The monkeys, against all behaviorist prediction, chose the cloth mother almost every time. Not because she fed them. Because she felt like safety. Harlow's discovery rocked psychology. What human beings, and creatures like us, crave most is not pleasure, not even survival in the raw sense, but the feeling of being secure enough to be themselves. Now apply that to you. How many years of your life have you spent performing? Performing competence for your employer. Performing strength for your family. Performing indifference for the men around you who might see weakness as an opening. Performing humor when you were grieving. Performing certainty when you were terrified. You built a wire mother of yourself, functional, productive, reliable, and called it identity. But that version of you dispenses output, not presence. And deep down, you know the difference. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus was born a slave. Literally owned. His master once twisted his leg as a demonstration of power. Epictetus looked at him calmly and said, "You are going to break it." The master kept twisting. The leg snapped. Epictetus said simply, "Did I not tell you?" No rage. No plea. No performance. What Epictetus had, forged in the absolute worst conditions, was an internal world so settled, so genuinely his own, that no external force could reach it. Not chains. Not pain. Not humiliation. You cannot be happy with yourself until you have actually met yourself. Not the performance. Not the resume. Not the face you put on for the world. The actual man underneath. The one with doubts and old wounds and unlived dreams and a quiet voice that still knows exactly what he believes. Meeting yourself is not comfortable. But it is the beginning of everything. If this is resonating with you, subscribe to Inner Steel. We do this work every week, the real work, the kind that changes how you carry yourself through the world. The second reality is one most men in midlife feel but can't name: the weight of other people's unfinished business. James was 53 years old when his mother died. He sat at the funeral dry-eyed, composed, the oldest son, the one who handled everything. Afterward, people told him how strong he was. He nodded and drove home and sat in his car in the driveway for an hour and a half. He wasn't grieving his mother. He was grieving the approval she never gave him. 40 years of trying to be the son she wanted. The grades, the career, the marriage she approved of, the grandchildren presented like offerings. And none of it had ever landed. None of it had ever been enough. And now the chance was gone forever, and he was sitting in a car in the dark realizing that he had organized the architecture of his entire life around a door that was now permanently closed. This is what psychologists call the borrowed self, an identity built not from the inside out, but from the outside in. Built from what your father expected, what your mother rewarded, what your culture approved, what your peers respected. Layer by layer, year by year, you constructed a self that belonged to everyone else. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, one of the most powerful men who ever lived, wrote in his private journal, which was never meant to be read by anyone, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." He didn't write that for posterity. He wrote it because he needed to remind himself. Because even he, a man worshipped like a god by millions, felt the gravitational pull of other people's opinions. Here is what I want you to sit with: the happiness you've been looking for is not waiting behind anyone's approval. Your father cannot give it to you. Your ex-wife cannot restore it. Your children's admiration cannot complete it. Your boss's recognition cannot unlock it. It was never held by anyone else. It was only ever inside you, waiting. The work of your second half of life, if you choose to do it, is to excavate what you actually believe, actually value, actually want, beneath all the borrowed weight. And then, quietly, irreversibly, to start living from that place. The third shift is about comparison, and the slow violence it does to a man's soul. In ancient Athens, there was a tradition called ostracism. Citizens would vote to exile a man from the city for 10 years, not because he had committed a crime, but because he had become too great, too successful, too threatening to the equilibrium. One day, as citizens were casting their pottery shards with names scratched on them, a man approached a stranger and asked him to write the name, Aristides, on his shard. The stranger asked why. The man said, "I'm sick of hearing him called the just." The stranger wrote the name. The stranger was Aristides himself. He was exiled. Not for his failures. For his excellence, and for the discomfort it caused in men who measured themselves against him. Comparison is ancient. It is wired into us from the earliest days of tribal living, when your relative status in the group determined your survival. But in those days you compared yourself to the 30 or 40 people in your immediate community. People you could see, touch, know. Now, with a device in your pocket, you compare yourself to 7 billion people simultaneously, the wealthiest, the most fit, the most successful, the most admired, curated highlight reels with no backstory, no failure, number 3 a.m. despair behind them. And you wonder why you feel like you're falling short. Seneca wrote to his friend Lucilius, "It is not that I am brave, it is that I know what is worth fearing." What he meant was this: he had decided, deliberately, what deserved his attention and what did not. The opinion of strangers did not make his list. Stop measuring your insides against other men's outsides. Stop scrolling through evidence that you are behind. You are not in a race. You never were. The man who dies having lived according to his own values beats the man who dies with the most trophies, but no idea what they were for. Your life is not a competition. It is an original, and original works are not graded on a curve. The fourth thing, self-acceptance, is not the same as complacency, and confusing them has cost you years. This is the objection I hear most often, and maybe you're feeling it right now. If I accept myself as I am, won't I stop trying to be better? No. That is not how this works. In 1945, Viktor Frankl walked out of Auschwitz. He had lost his wife, his parents, his manuscript, a book he had poured years of his life into. He had survived the most systematic destruction of human dignity ever organized by human beings. He had been stripped of every external possession, every role, every comfort. And yet, Frankl went on to write Man's Search for Meaning, one of the most widely read books in human history. He founded an entire school of psychotherapy. He lectured around the world into his 80s. He did not survive and then stop. He survived and then expanded. Here is what made the difference. Frankl did not wait to accept himself until he had rebuilt his life. He accepted himself, his choices, his values, his will to meaning, in the middle of the worst thing that ever happened to him. And that acceptance was not the end of striving. It was the engine of it. A man who hates himself does not improve. He punishes himself, which looks like discipline from the outside but is corrosive from the inside. Self-hatred is not a motivational tool. It is a wound that keeps reopening. A man who accepts himself, who says, "This is where I am, this is what I've done, this is what I'm working with," builds from solid ground. He can see clearly because he is not defending. He can grow because he is not hiding. The Stoics called this a more fatty love of fate. Not resignation. Love. The active, deliberate embrace of your actual life, including its scars and its limitations, as the raw material for something magnificent. You are not a finished product. You are a work in progress. But you can only build from where you actually are, not from where you wish you were, not from where you think you should be. From here. This exact place. Right now. Accept it. Then build. The fifth reality will challenge everything you've been told about what it means to be a man. Silence is not weakness. Solitude is not loneliness. And knowing your own mind is the rarest form of strength. Theodore Roosevelt is remembered as one of the most vigorous, loud, combative men who ever occupied the American presidency. Rough Rider. Trust buster. The man who charged up San Juan Hill. What almost no one talks about is what happened to Roosevelt in 1884. In a single day, the 14th of February, his wife died of kidney failure and his mother died of typhoid fever. In the same house. On the same day. Roosevelt wrote a single X in his diary that night. Nothing else. Then he left New York. He went west, to the Badlands of the Dakota Territory, and he disappeared into solitude for nearly 2 years. No politics. No performance. No audience. He worked cattle. He hunted. He sat alone in a landscape so vast and indifferent it could swallow a man's ego entirely. And when he came back, those who knew him said something had changed, not that the fire was gone, but that it had a different quality. Steadier. More deliberate. More his own. Roosevelt needed to be alone with himself long enough to find out who he was without the noise. Most men are terrified of that silence. Because in silence, you cannot escape the questions. In silence, you cannot perform. In silence, you have to sit with the gap between who you are and who you told everyone you were. But that gap is not an accusation. It is an invitation. Epictetus taught that the practice of philosophy, of examined living, required you to turn regularly inward, to question your own impressions, your own reactions, your own values, before you acted on them. Not to paralyze yourself with self-analysis. To know yourself well enough that you could not be easily misled about what mattered. Knowing your own mind is not a luxury. For a man in the second half of life, it is a survival skill. Because the second half is when things get real: illness, loss, diminishment, mortality. And when those things arrive, the man who knows himself will face them. The man who never did will run. Seek the silence. Not once. Regularly. It is where you find out who you actually are. The sixth point is this: forgiveness of yourself is not optional. It is the foundation everything else is built on. His name was Gordon Wilson. On November 8, 1987, he was standing with his daughter Marie at a Remembrance Day ceremony in Enniskillen, Northern Ireland, when an IRA bomb exploded. He and Marie were buried under rubble. In the darkness, holding her hand, he heard her say, "Daddy, I love you very much." Those were her last words. Gordon Wilson survived. Marie did not. And then Gordon Wilson did something that shocked an entire nation at war with itself. He said publicly, "I bear no ill will. I bear no grudge." He said he would pray, that night, for the men who had planted the bomb. The outrage was immediate. Many people called him naive, weak, complicit. He was unshaken. Wilson spent the rest of his life working for peace and reconciliation in Northern Ireland. He died in 1995. His words on that day are credited by historians as one of the most significant turning points in the emotional landscape of the Troubles. He could not have done any of that, could not have found the clarity, the purpose, the extraordinary courage, if he had spent those years in the acid of unforgiven pain. Now I want to ask you something. And I want you to sit with it honestly. What have you not forgiven yourself for? The marriage you couldn't hold together. The father you weren't when your children were small. The chance you didn't take. The man you were in your 20s. The anger. The silence. The years you spent half asleep. That accounting, that private list of things you hold against yourself, is not honesty. It is a prison. And you built it. And you are the only one who can open the door. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Your regrets are not the end of the story. They are the material. But you cannot build with material you refuse to touch. Forgive yourself? Not because what you did didn't matter. Because you cannot move forward while dragging the past behind you like chains. Forgive yourself, and then do better. That is the whole instruction. The seventh shift is about the body. Because you cannot be happy with yourself if you are at war with the physical world you live in. Jacques Lalanne was born in 1914, the son of French immigrants, into what he later described as a childhood of sugar addiction, depression, and physical misery. By 15, he was, in his own words, a miserable, weak, sick little kid. Then he walked into a lecture by a nutritionist named Paul Bragg, who talked about the relationship between what you put in your body and how your mind functioned. Lalanne was transformed. Not gradually, immediately. He changed everything: his diet, his sleep, his movement, his relationship to his physical self. He went on to open what many historians credit as America's first modern health club. He swam handcuffed through San Francisco Bay towing 70 boats, with 70 people to celebrate his 70th birthday. He did 1,000 jumping jacks and 1,000 pull-ups in 1 hour and 22 minutes on national television at age 45. But none of that is the point. The point is what he said toward the end of his life. Your body is your slave. It works for you. He meant that when you take your physical self seriously, not to perform for anyone, not to compete, but because you respect the house you live in, everything changes. Clarity. Energy. Confidence. The sense that you are a man who keeps his commitments. The Stoics did not separate the mind from the body the way we are sometimes told they did. Marcus Aurelius woke before dawn. He trained. He was deliberate about sleep and food in ways that were extraordinary for his era. Epictetus, despite his permanent physical injury, was relentless about the discipline of the body as a practice of the will. You do not need to be an athlete. You do not need a gym membership, or a program, or a specific number on a scale. You need to move. Every day. You need to eat in a way that honors the machine you depend on. You need to sleep as though rest is not weakness but strategy. When your body feels like your ally instead of your enemy, the emotional landscape shifts in ways that are almost impossible to describe and completely impossible to fake. You feel, not happy in a shallow sense, but capable. Solid. Present. Your body is not a source of shame. It is a life you are given to inhabit. Inhabit it fully. The eighth truth is one that separates men who find peace in the second half of life from those who don't. Purpose is not something you find. It is something you build. There is a Japanese concept called ikigai, a reason for being. It sits at the intersection of 4 things: what you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, and what you can be rewarded for. The overlap of all 4 is where a meaningful life lives. But here's what most people miss about ikigai: it is not a destination. It is a daily practice. It is not something you discover once, like treasure on a map. It is something you build, brick by brick, decision by decision, with the years you have left. Consider Colonel Harland Sanders. Not the brand, the man. He was 62 years old, nearly broke, when he took his chicken recipe and started driving across America to sell it to restaurants. He was rejected over 1,000 times. He slept in the back of his car. He was, by any external measure, a man who had failed at almost everything. He did not stop. By the time he sold Kentucky Fried Chicken at 74, he was a multimillionaire. But more than that, he was a man who had found what he was for. Late. Improbably. Without anyone's permission. Here is what I need you to understand: you have not missed your window. The second half of life is not the closing of possibilities. For a man who has done the inner work, who has accepted himself, forgiven himself, quieted the noise of other people's expectations, it is an opening. Because finally, you know what you don't want. And that knowledge is extraordinarily clarifying. What do you actually care about? Not what you're supposed to care about. Not what would impress someone. What genuinely, privately moves you. Start there. Build from there. Even if it seems too small, too late, too unconventional. Build from there. Purpose built by your own hands, from your own values, toward your own vision, is the only kind that will hold you up when things get hard. Borrowed purpose collapses. Genuine purpose, the kind a man finds in the second half of a fully examined life, does not. The ninth reality is perhaps the most counterintuitive thing I will say in this entire video. Being happy with yourself requires you to stop trying to be happy. This sounds like a contradiction. It is not. The philosopher John Stuart Mill, who spent his life studying happiness and the conditions that produce it, wrote something remarkable in his autobiography. Ask yourself whether you are happy, and you cease to be so. He was describing what psychologists now call the hedonic paradox. The more directly you pursue happiness as a goal, the more it eludes you. Happiness is not a target. It is a byproduct. A byproduct of what? Of living according to your values. Of doing the work you believe in. Of treating people the way you believe is right. Of facing difficulty without flinching. Of being genuinely present in the moments of your actual life rather than constantly reaching for some imagined future state in which things will finally be as they should be. The ancient Stoics called this eudaimonia, not happiness in the shallow sense, but flourishing. A deep, active, engaged sense of rightness with your existence. And they were unanimous: it comes from virtue, from living according to your nature and your values, not from acquiring things, achieving things, or being approved of by people. Think about the moments in your life when you have felt most alive, most fully yourself. I will wager they were not moments of receiving praise. They were moments of complete absorption, in a piece of work, in a conversation that cracked something open, in a physical challenge you weren't sure you could meet, in a moment of genuine connection with someone you love. In those moments, you were not thinking about being happy. You were not performing for anyone. You were simply, completely there. That is what we are building toward. Not a feeling. A way of being. A way of being so fully invested in your actual life, your actual values, your actual relationships and work and growth, that happiness stops being a destination and becomes the weather of your existence. Stop trying to be happy. Start trying to be real. The happiness will follow. Make sure you subscribe to Inner Steel if you haven't already. This is the kind of conversation we have here, week after week, for men who are serious about the second half of life. The 10th and final shift is the one that makes all the others possible. You have to decide that you are worth the effort. Not as a theory. Not as something you say to sound strong. As a lived, acted, non-negotiable commitment. In the spring of 1944, a young man named Reuven Feuerstein escaped from a Nazi transport train. He was 17 years old. He had already survived the Bucharest pogrom. He had already seen what human beings could do to each other when they decided that certain people were not worth the effort of being treated as human. He survived. He emigrated to Israel. He earned degrees in psychology. And then he spent the next 6 decades doing the most extraordinary thing. He devoted his life to proving that every human being, regardless of age, regardless of background, regardless of how damaged or limited they appeared, was capable of change, capable of growth, capable of becoming more fully themselves. His method, called mediated learning experience, was used with Holocaust survivors, with children with severe cognitive disabilities, with adults who had been written off by every system that was supposed to help them. And again, the people who had been told they were beyond help proved that they were not. Feuerstein called his approach structural cognitive modifiability, the idea that the brain, and by extension the self, is not fixed. That human beings, at any age, in any condition, retain the capacity for transformation. He believed this not as an abstract philosophy but as a personal, visceral, hard-won truth. And it showed in how he worked. With infinite patience. With absolute insistence on the person's worth. Here is the question I want to leave you with. Do you believe you are worth the effort? Not whether other people believe it. Not whether you've earned it by some external standard. Not whether your history justifies it. Do you, in the quiet, honest, private place where you actually live, believe that you deserve your own investment? Because every other shift we have talked about today rests on this one. You cannot meet yourself if you don't think the meeting is worth having. You cannot forgive yourself if you believe the sentence is justified. You cannot build purpose if you believe it's too late, and too much, and you are too far gone. The men who live the second half of life with power, with dignity, with genuine peace, they are not the men who had the easiest first half. They are the men who decided, at some point, that they were worth fighting for. Not for anyone else. For themselves. Marcus Aurelius lost children. He governed an empire that was constantly at war on multiple fronts. He dealt with betrayal, illness, grief. He was not free of suffering. But he kept writing in that journal. He kept examining himself. He kept asking how to be better today than he was yesterday. Not because he had an audience. Because he believed the work was worth doing. You are worth the work. Not when you've fixed everything. Not when you've achieved something that proves it. Right now. As you are. With every flaw you carry, every regret you've accumulated, every chapter you wish had gone differently. You are worth the investment of your own full attention. Your own honesty. Your own patience. Your own fierce, unwavering, stoic commitment to becoming the man you are capable of being. This is where it all lands. Being happy with yourself is not a destination you arrive at after you've done everything right. It is a practice you begin right now in the imperfect, complicated, already in progress reality of your actual life. It begins with meeting yourself, really meeting yourself, beneath the performance. It continues with putting down the weight of other people's expectations that you were never meant to carry. It deepens when you stop comparing your insides to everyone else's outsides. It grows when you understand that accepting yourself is not the enemy of improving yourself, it is the ground from which genuine improvement grows. It requires you to seek silence, not as an escape, but as a homecoming. To forgive yourself, not to excuse the past but to free the future. To honor your body as a partner in the work of living. To build purpose from the inside out, with your own values and your own vision. To stop chasing happiness as though it were a thing you can catch, and instead build a life so aligned with who you actually are that happiness becomes the atmosphere. And it rests, finally, on the one decision that makes all the others possible, that you are worth it. That is not arrogance. That is not delusion. That is not the comfortable lie of a self-help culture that wants to sell you something. That is the ancient, hard-won truth that the Stoics knew, that Franco proved, that Feuerstein spent a lifetime demonstrating. Human beings, when they decide their own transformation matters, are capable of things that look from the outside like miracles. You are not too old. You are not too broken. You are not too far behind. You are, right now, at this exact moment, exactly where you need to be to begin. Begin. If this reached you, if something in this conversation cracked something open or reminded you of something you already knew but had stopped living, subscribe to Inner Steel. This is what we do here. Every week. For men who have decided the second half of life is not a retreat. It is an advance. I'll see you in the next one.